Hi, this is Arun from arunsyoga.in. I'm a software engineer who mostly work with Node.js, PHP, and other backend technologies. And I'm an open source contributor as well. I'm a tantric by birth in a family which is passing tantric wisdom from generations to generations from past 2000 years of legacy and got lucky to travel across India and got chances to study under various gurus from different backgrounds and disciplines. You could connect with me in arunsyoga.in. Here I'm helping you to design a divine lifestyle which is based on Vedic astrology, tantra and other yogic system of understanding.
Hello, all. Today's podcast, I'm joining with Joshua Shea again. He is the author of the book I'm a Porn Addict and Now What. This episode, we are discussing about his book Porn and Pandemic, which talks about how 3 months in 2020 changed the culture around porn. However, welcome to another episode of podcast series, episode number 1, book review, porn and pandemic.
So hi Joshua, this is Arun again. I'm so happy to see you again to my podcast. So this time I would really like to talk about your book called The Porn and the Pandemic. What is that actually happening during the time of pandemic and why people are going to porn, and more specifically like this book giving actually a glimpse that an idea that there is something called porn addiction is actually existing. So there is something called the healthy porn viewers, and there is something called the addicted porn viewers. So this book gives an idea about who is porn addict and who is not. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that, like there is some data are presented in this particular book, and there is more things are there inside this particular book. Even though this is a very small book, it gives a very pretty good idea about what is actually happening. Can you just describe exactly what is that porn addiction is, and what is that the healthy porn viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's important for everybody to recognize that addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction. If you have an addiction to alcohol, or you have an addiction to sex, or food, or heroin, or pornography, or whatever it is, uh, from from one person to another, most of what's going on in the brain is the same. Addiction is a disease of the brain. That's important for people to realize. It's not, if you're addicted to food, it's not an addiction of the stomach. If you're addicted to gambling, it's not an addiction of the wallet. Every kind of addiction is addiction of in the mind. So we each happen to find those of us who are addicts or former addicts. And like we discussed before, I am both a former porn addict and a former alcoholic. I have uh, I have found that there is no healthy level of alcohol or pornography that I can have. That is because something in my mind, the disease of addiction in my mind, makes me crave these two things to the point that it has very negative ramifications on my life. That's what addiction largely is. It is when you cannot stay away from a substance or a behavior despite understanding that there are very negative consequences that could happen. It's also when you take this substance or behavior and prioritize it ahead of things, such as your health or your relationships with your family and friends, or your safety or your money. The number one thing in your life becomes the addiction. And finally, for somebody who is an addict and is looking to identify it, most addicts can tell you very long stories about how they have made promises to themselves, how they have made bargains with themselves that they won't use, whether it's I won't drink tonight, or I won't look at porn tonight, or I'm not going to go online and gamble and play poker tonight. And they fail at keeping these promises. That's another big sign of addiction. So when it comes to, pornography, obviously I can't look at pornography because it has very negative ramifications in my life. Now, we can talk about pornography, and we can talk about whether it is ethical to look at pornography or whether it's morally wrong to look at pornography. I think that's a completely different discussion than what we're having here right now. If we want to talk about, what's right and wrong, because that's different for every person. And in recognizing that's different for every person, I think that we have to scientifically accept the fact that there are people who can look at pornography, who can use it in a, I don't want to necessarily say healthy way, but can use it in a way that is not unhealthy. This is similar to me, who can go to a casino twice a year or three times a year, and I can win 100 or lose 100. It doesn't matter to me. I don't crave going there. I don't have a problem overeating. I don't have a problem under eating. So I'm not afraid to go to restaurants or buffets or anything like that. That's because my behavior in those areas would be considered healthy. And there are others who can be healthy with pornography. I just think that it's one of these things that we don't talk about much in this world because it involves sex, because it involves nudity, because it involves, our private sexual thoughts. We don't discuss it very much. And I think that based on the internet coming into our houses over the last 20 years, that we do need to talk about this, because for the first time in, civilization, 2 million years that we've been around, or whatever it is, we now have unending access to any kind of pornography that we want. And we don't know if that has an effect on us. We haven't studied it over the long term. And it's important that people understand that, yes, while there can be healthy sexuality, just like I think I am a healthy gambler or I'm a healthy eater, it's good to know what it is you're dealing with. I understand there's gambling addiction. I understand what people who are gambling addicts think and how they act. If I ever saw any of those behaviors in me or any kinds of red flags, I would stop gambling immediately. So all I ask is people who can handle pornography, who are not like me, who are not addicts. All I ask is that you understand that there can be too much pornography. There can be an overuse of it. And you absolutely need to be aware that that's possible. And if you are aware and it's not happening to you, go ahead. If pornography is part of your healthy sexuality, it's legal. I'm not going to be the one to stand in your way and say no.
So, and here in this particular book, you are giving a lot of data, like many peoples are coming to many websites like onlyfans.com and
Yep.
some other particular website where people become like online strippers.
Yep.
They sell their stripping tendency. I mean, whatever we can see on bars or anything like that, they are selling it through online. And is this data, what you are describing in your book, is actually accurate? Those many people are there, so many people are coming to online stripping club.
Oh, yeah, and I actually have more data since that book was published, because we have many, many more months of data since that book was put out there. And on January 1st, to show you how much the online explosion of do-it-yourself, make-it-at-home pornography was, there was about 300,000 people who were making pornography for OnlyFans on January 1st, 2000. Now on January 1st, 2021, there was approximately 1.3 to 1.5 million people making it online. And that means that just on that one site across the world, 1 million people in 1 year joined the world of making online pornography. And that's only one site. There are plenty of cam sites. There are plenty of other options out there aside from OnlyFans if you're going to do this kind of thing. And that to me is probably going to be the legacy of the pandemic, because a lot of these people across the world, they were put out of jobs. And who were put out of jobs? The people who worked at restaurants, the people who were bartenders, your waitresses, the people who worked in public service jobs. Who are those people usually? They're usually young people. They're usually people who are good looking. They're usually people who are able to be good with customer service. So suddenly these people can't pay for their rent. They can't pay for, their food, or if they have kids, or how do you suddenly support, your life when overnight this pandemic hits the world and you have no money? What do you do? Well, in this case, a lot of men and a lot of women decided to start taking pictures of themselves and start making videos of themselves, either, in their underwear or naked or having sex or whatever they determined was suitable for them, and started selling it online. And because there were so many of us at home who couldn't go to work anyway because, non-essential workers, or whatever you call them, depending on where you live, the use of pornography skyrocketed. So, while obviously, it's important that people get vaccines and wear masks and all this stuff that's very important for right now, I think 20 years from now, we may be talking about the pandemic in a way that talks about how it changed pornography online, because people who had never considered looking at pornography online ran to it during the epidemic, watched it like they'd never watched before during the epidemic, or I'm sorry, pandemic. And not just that, but millions of people, or at least 1 million people who had never made pornography and sold it before, started doing that. Technically, if you are selling your pornography, you're a professional. You're a porn star. So right now, and as you and I record this in the middle of 2021, we have more porn stars out there than we've ever had in the history of the world. And I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's a bad thing. I mean, I think in the long run, it probably isn't good, because a lot of these people who are making the pornography may not understand what the ramifications are down the road. They may not realize that not only, do you have nude pictures of you out there forever, but maybe there's a mental toll. Maybe there's people who get addicted to making the pornography. When I was writing my book, I spoke with many OnlyFans models. And while many of them were doing it for the money during the pandemic, a lot of them started telling me things like, I feel so special when I'm doing this. People make me feel good. I can't get a boyfriend in real life, but I've got men who want to fly me around the world and give me vacations. And I think that for a lot of these people, this may be the kind of escape that drugs provide some people, that alcohol provides some people. As strange as it sounds to many of us, I think that creating pornography is an addiction for many of these people. They speak about it the way that people speak about the dopamine rush of other addictions. So I wonder, in 20 years, are these men and women who are 25 years old now, are they going to be 45 years old and still putting pornography on the internet? Not because they're making money, but because it's that addiction, it's that dopamine rush. I think that this coronavirus pandemic will be remembered as the time that people making pornography first showed signs of addictions, not just people like me who had been looking at it for 20 years.
So you already wrote a book about this pandemic and how it's so there is not a conclusion. This is something which I felt by reading your book. You are not concluding that how it's gonna affect the human relationship, how it's gonna uh, take up on our further sexuality of the peoples, those who are gonna watch this particular kind of porn. And when these models or the strippers, those who comes out, how do they gonna face the society on? Is there any conclusion, like is there any conclusion you would like to give, like?
I think it's too early to have a conclusion. I mean, you know me well enough that I like data, I like research, I like scientific conclusions, and I don't think that enough time. I mean, we are still hopefully dealing with the tail end of the pandemic right now. Hopefully, it's almost over, but who knows? A year ago, we were having this conversation hoping that it was almost over back then. So we don't know where we are in the active world of this pandemic right now. So I don't think we have enough data. I think that statistics that I give people about pornography before the pandemic are absolutely useless now, because we've all had our lives changed so much in 2020 and 2021 because of this pandemic. I mean, most people, while people like you and I who do podcasts, we've known about Zoom for a long time. The rest of the world didn't know about Zoom before the pandemic. The rest of the world had never had a meeting or a doctor's appointment over the computer before. There were, a lot of people had never done curbside takeout for food before. All of these things that are new to our lives are probably going to stick around. How is that going to affect, restaurants? How is that going to affect the economy? How is our new life after the coronavirus, after COVID, how are our new lives going to be? We don't know that yet. So I don't think we can reach a final conclusion about what happened with pornography during the pandemic yet, because we're at the tail end of the pandemic. All we know, based on looking at website statistics of many of the larger pornography sites, is that it's undeniable that more people looked than ever before and more people were making it than ever before. I think that for some of these people, there may be side effects that don't show up for years. There may be, a 22-year-old girl who, for 3 or 4 months made content for one of these sites or was a cam girl, and then she stopped. Now, what happens in 10 years if, she has an 8-year-old kid and they come home from school and say, "Mommy, you know, Tommy or Johnny's father said that, you were on the internet with no clothes." How does she deal with it then? Who knows? What happens if forget that. What happens if in 10 years all of a sudden she starts getting massive depression? What if she becomes religious or has a change of heart and believes what she did was very, very bad and slips into a depression? We don't know how these people are going to react 10 years later, 20 years later, to having this very personal sexual content out there. We don't know how it's going to affect their lives. Now, I'm not saying we need to wait 20 years to find out, but I think that we just don't have enough data now to really understand what normal is. All I can say is that I think that the new normal involves a lot more people watching pornography than ever before and a lot more people making pornography than ever before. What does that world look like? I guess we'll find out together.
So is there any message, like I felt like there is a lack of message in the work which you have done over here, like this is not giving any message, like it is actually giving hints, like on those who are not aware of many of these websites, they will be after reading this particular book, they will be aware of that particular websites, and they will be start using that. I don't know whether it is a positive effect or negative effect, or is this what something which you have thought to put out for the public or something like that. But there is a lack of message inside this. So what is that your vision? Like,
Yeah.
what is that your vision? What you want to say?
Well,
These are datas,
yeah,
like collection of datas and datas from different websites, including Pornhub and X videos and many other websites out there. Many datas. So, what is that you would like to say? What is that message?
Yeah, well, as you know, I've written 3 books. That's my most recent book,
Mhm.
and all of them are very different. My first book was my personal story
Mhm.
of addiction. My second book was designed for the partners of people who are porn addicts. This book, I actually tried to go more back. I was a journalist and a newspaper writer for about 20 years. I wanted to create something that was less emotional and honestly had less of a message. What I wanted to do was to present data that was fresh and to give people a true picture without taking an opinion on it. You know, is pornography good or bad? We can discuss both of those things. Is it okay to go online and sell pictures of yourself naked? Well, maybe for some people it's okay. Maybe for some people it's very harmful. Uh, the direction I took with this book was to try to not sway somebody's opinion. I wanted to present them with data based on where we were. I mean, because let's be honest, this pandemic, they keep saying, is once in 100 years. This is something that our parents and grandparents never experienced. So, what I wanted to do was almost just take a picture. If you look at a picture, there's no opinions in a picture. There's not usually a message in a picture. You have to look at it and you have to interpret it for yourself. And that's what I wanted to do with this book, was to present the data and say, here is what is happening right now. Here is how this is different than before the pandemic. Is this okay? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this horrible? Do we need to decide as a society that we have to fight this online pornography and people making it? Or do we need to all lighten up and say this is just part of our world now, like everything else? And sexuality is normal. So we need to just not worry about online pornography. I didn't want to have my personal opinion affect too much of this book. So I'm actually glad you noticed that, because it's by design. If there was a message, my message again is education. Here are a lot of facts. You have to interpret these facts for your personal life and your personal way of being. You know, I can pick up a book of cocktail recipes and I can make mixed drinks for people all day long. I just can't drink it because I know who I am. I can't drink alcohol. I can be around it, but I can't drink it. And that's kind of one of these things where I think people need to look at their own use of pornography or look at their own creation of pornography and then consider the facts in that book and make their own decision whether it's healthy for them or not. And if they should change anything in their life or not based on the data that I present.
So, for instance, somebody who is actually don't know about this, and somebody, for example, let's assume there is a normal person, and he is very religious person, and there is the one porn star who does porn for a living and recurring time. Okay, and these two peoples, assume that these two peoples are reading this particular book, and my question is, what is the change you want to see on the mind of these two people?
I want them to have new facts that they haven't had before. I want them to learn. I want them to learn what the numbers look like. I want them to learn how they have changed. I want them to look at their own lives and then factor in this data and determine, I believe that this book, when I talk about the average person looks at this website for pornography for 12 minutes. And I do go through different adult websites and talk about how their use was a little bit more like, one website the average user went from 9 minutes to 12 minutes. Well, if you're somebody who's reading this book and you were looking at this website for 30 minutes before the pandemic, and during the pandemic you started looking at for 4 hours, that should probably tell you that compared to the average person, you're looking at this a lot more. Is that a problem? Is it a problem if you are looking at pornography far more than the average person? It may not. You may not even know what the average person looks at pornography. But in this book, these facts and figures are there. And you can compare your life and your individual situation, both before the pandemic and during, and determine if any use before or during or increase of use during is unhealthy for you. With somebody, so that's what I would say to the person. You see? Okay. All right. And for the second half of that question, for the person who is making pornography, I don't know if they think about the long term of it. And I'm not saying that. I don't think it's going to be a big deal if you have naked photos out in 20 years, because millions of people will have them out there. I don't think that we will view nudity as the taboo we view it as now in 20 or 25 years. But I also think we have to ask the question, is that healthy? And hopefully, some of these people who perhaps are making pornography and look at the book will stop and think about things in a way they haven't before. If I am I doing this just for the money? I told myself that I was going to make OnlyFans for just during the first 6 months of the pandemic before I could go to work. Well, now a lot of these people are deciding to stay with OnlyFans and not go to work. So what's the best thing for them to do? They are now changing their plans. Are they changing it because of the money, or are they changing it because they love the response from people? They love the attention. They crave, people telling them that they're handsome or beautiful. So I think that it's important for the people who are making it to stop and think, what is going through my mind? What are my motivations for doing this? I started this to make money. That was my honest truth. I started this to make money, but we're now a year later. I could go back to work, but I'm still doing this. Why am I doing it? Really, what I'm hoping that giving people data does is force them to look at their life and ask themselves some hard questions. And, they are the ones who can come up with the answer with them. Even when I'm coaching people, I have to tell them, I'm not here to give you answers. I'm here to just ask questions. I'm here to provide some facts and some data. You have to apply the data. You have to apply these questions to your life and make your own decisions.
So in this particular book, there is an incident which you were speaking about, that your son was actually recording. What was that happening? Like, you were while developing the content for this particular book, you were speaking about the content of this particular book, and your son was recording that to make the content of this particular book. So in that particular time, what was that happening through your mind? How do you look at on that particular taboo subject? um, how do you look at into that particular taboo subject, like father is talking about the porn and the son is recording the same?
I think that what we have to do is to step back from the idea of father, son, mother, daughter. I think that we have to, I mean, obviously, they're important things, they're relations and all that. But what I think we have to do is remember that each one of us individually is our own unique sexual being. Now, here's the reality is, I don't want to think about my parents ever having sex. That's gross. But the reality is, my parents had sex one day. I'm proof. And they had sex twice because I have a brother too. My guess is they probably had sex a few other times too. And that's not something that's a bad thing. That's not something that should be a taboo thing.
No,
That's
I'm not.
not some
I'm not saying in
no,
that
no,
way.
no, I understand, but what I'm getting to is that I also have to accept the fact as a father that my 22-year-old daughter, who has lived with a guy for several years, of course she's having sex with him. And I have to accept the fact that my 18-year-old son, who is going off to college in a few weeks, he is probably going to go off to college and have sexual experiences. I think that, and I think that what we have to do is step back from these father son, mother daughter, all of these relationships that we have in our head and what they mean. And I think we have to look at ourselves just as humans. And what's taboo for one person isn't always taboo for another. Although, I mean, there are society taboos, but we have to respect the fact that we're each different sexually. And yes, your kids may not have the same opinions of sex, may not have the same behaviors towards sex that you do. That doesn't make them a bad person whatsoever. That just makes them a different person. So, your taboos may not be their taboos. Their taboos may not be your taboos. We have to respect each other. I think that's at the core of it, is that we have to absolutely respect each other as different sexual beings. And I think that if we see something happening that doesn't look healthy, we should speak up. It's like if all of a sudden I notice that you're losing a lot of weight and you're not eating, I should say something because I wonder if your nutrition is healthy. If all of a sudden you start sleeping 6 hours extra every day than you have been, I should probably speak up and say something. It doesn't matter if you're my friend, my wife, my son. We need to look out for each other, and we need to respect that we're all different individuals, even if we have these family relations that sometimes makes talking about this stuff taboo.
So one more question. This book approximately cost 10 to 15 USD, right? Approximately 15 USD.
Yeah, I think it depends. Sometimes Amazon runs sales, but the Kindle version is around $10, and then I've seen the paper one that you have anywhere from 5 to 10, depending on if they're running a sale.
So is that worth spending?
What do you, I don't understand the question.
So if somebody want to spend approximately 10 to 15 USD to this particular book, uh, is this really worth that guy to pay for that? How do you feel about it?
Well, I think it's worth the money, of course, because I wrote it. I don't want people to read it and think that it's going to solve their pornography problem, because it's not. It is more like journalism. It's more documentary than anything else. If you read my first book if you are a porn addict and you want help. Read my second book if you're married to a porn addict or you're dating a porn addict and you want help. This third book is looking at how porn addiction exploded or potentially will explode because of the pandemic. This book is the least amount of self-help of anyone I've written. What I'm trying to do here is just document a moment in time. So, obviously, I think it's worth it. I wouldn't have spent the time writing it if I didn't think that it was worth it. I think it's an interesting story, and I think now that we are 18, 19 months into this pandemic, I think that people can look back and recognize, oh yes, I remember early on we were all stuck at home. I bet most people who read the book are like, ah, yes, I looked at pornography more than I did before. I think that my hope is that this book, even in 10 years, there will be students at university writing papers about the pandemic, and they will use this book as a resource, documenting what was happening at the time. I look at this book as more of a historic document. If you don't have a pornography problem, if you're not that interested in pornography addiction, you may still like this book if you enjoy history or you enjoy nonfiction. it is a very different book than the first two. So I don't want people to mistakenly get it and think that it's going to fix their porn problems. It won't. That's why I wrote my first two books. This was just kind of a different project.
So, how many days did you took to write this particular book?
Oh, this was a crazy, crazy project. My first two books, the first one took me 2 years to write, 2.5 years to write. The second book took about a year and a half. This book, I pitched it to my publisher on May 1st, and by the middle of July, it was published. I literally spent probably 30 days in a row working 18 to 20-hour days, interviewing people, writing, getting data, because I knew I needed this book to come out during the pandemic. So people could look at their behavior and look at the facts and adjust it if they needed to. So this was a crazy, crazy project. It was almost too fast. For my comfortability level, like to go from 2 years writing a book to not even 2 months, that's crazy. But it was very long days, lots of interviews, lots of writing, lots of data. But I'm very proud of it. I think that for the time I had to write it, for getting it out as quickly as I wanted to and needed to, it's not a bad book.
So the same thing will happen actually, like, we were saying that, for an example, a porn star's kid, and he is actually complaining to his mummy that he found out her in an adult film. So, and your kids and grandkids are coming to you and saying that,
Yeah.
hey, look at this, you were a porn addict. So how do you
Yeah.
actually respond to that particular situation?
Well, what I would do is it depends on their age, number one, and it depends on how much they already know about pornography and if they know what pornography is. Do I have to explain pornography to them? And how old are they? You explain pornography to a 5-year-old, it's pictures of people who are naked, versus somebody who's 12 years old who's probably already seen pornography on their own. That's there's a world out there where people will pay to see naked people, and I had to make money once, and I decided that I would let people take pictures of me naked. I was over 18 years old, so I could make my own decisions, and I knew that someday people might see it and who maybe I didn't want them to see it, and I certainly didn't want you to see this, but I did what I needed to do to make money, and I am either ashamed of it and it was a mistake because of A, B, and C, or I'm proud of what I did and it was not a mistake because of A, B, and C. And if you want to do this kind of stuff, I hope you'll talk to me first and I can tell you more about it. But you cannot do it until you're 18 years old and you can make your decision on your own. Until then, this stuff is off limits, just like cigarettes or drinking, or depending on where you are in the world and your age limitations, like marijuana or whatever. This is off limits to you until you're 18 years old. Once you're an adult, you're going to be able to make your own decisions because you're going to understand more of the issues around this. So I wouldn't treat it like it's a giant taboo. I wouldn't, if I had a grandkid, or I had a kid come up to me and be like, "Oh, look what oh my goodness, put that down. Oh my God, no, that's horrible." You can't have that reaction because it immediately, oh, there's something special about this. If you don't want this to be special in the kid's mind, you can't act like it's a big deal. Whether they're 6 years old or 12 years old, I don't think you can act like it's a giant deal, because I think that creates more curiosity. Oh my God, what if dad or if grandfather cares so much about this? What's the big deal? He doesn't care about very many things, but he clearly cares about this. So I think that if you can be like, yes, these are pictures of naked people. Some people like to look at these. Some people will pay money to look at these. Some people have jobs where they let people take pictures of them like this. You shouldn't let people take pictures of you like this, and you can never take pictures of other people like this. This is for grown-ups, this is for adults, and if you see this somewhere, let me know. I'm not going to be mad at you or anything. I just want to know how you stumbled upon it. Much like if you find a cigarette on a playground, don't put it in your mouth. Or if you find an open bottle of beer, don't take a sip. This is something that's just for adults. And I think being that simple with it, I think being that calm and collected with it will go a lot further than if you act like it's a very big deal.
So, did your book? Does your book had enough reach as much as that you are thinking?
How do you mean that? I can take that a couple different ways.
Mm, so, what is that the reach that you are imagining on your mind? This book to
I
go
th-
through.
I think I think that there's going to be a life for it right now, with people who are very interested in the pandemic and just everything around it, and people who are worried about their porn use because of the pandemic. I think if people were porn addicts back in 2010, this book won't do much for them. I think that if people, uh, if their porn behavior is largely the same as it was before the pandemic, it's probably it's interesting, but it doesn't affect them very much. I think the people whose behavior has changed, this gives them data to measure their changing behavior against. I think that's who it's really for right now. Once we get past this pandemic, once we get into some kind of routine of whatever normal life is going to be after the pandemic, I think that's when more people may look at this book for historic reasons and for the data. They may not use it to measure themselves because in real time we'll be past the pandemic at that point. So I'm hoping it lives on as a historical document showing what was happening at this one snapshot in time. So hopefully people who come back to look at the pandemic, come back to look at human behavior, sociology, sexuality during the pandemic, will see this book as a resource for years to come. That's my hope, at least.
So, what is the market size? Like, let's put it in a business terms. Like, what is the market size that you are imagining this book has to go to?
I think that my hope is that if there are therapists, if there are rehabilitation centers, if there are doctors who are dealing with uh, patients and clients who report that their sexual health has declined during the pandemic for whatever reason, especially pornography, that they can give them this book or they can recommend this book as something to read to figure out where they really are. Here is the average person went from looking at this pornography website for 9 minutes to 12 minutes during the pandemic. You say that you look at this website too. You used to look at it for about 20 minutes. Now you're looking at it for 30. Well, you look at it more than the average person, but that's not a ridiculous amount of information. That's not a ridiculous increase. From 9 to 12 minutes, 20 to 30, it's a little bit similar if you extrapolate it. However, if you used to look for an hour and now you're looking for 5 hours, like I mentioned before, that's not what the regular person is doing. That's not what the average person is doing. I think more than me saying, hey, you should be careful here, or more than the doctor saying, hey, you should be careful here, there are a lot of people who want to deny that they have a problem, who don't want to believe they have a problem, who truly don't believe they have a problem. For myself, who's a very scientific, logical guy, I think that if I was given this book during the pandemic and my pornography use increased, I could look at it with no judgment, with no opinion, because it's just data. People people looked at it with these numbers. This is what the numbers of people making pornography were. It's a book of a lot of numbers. And I do talk about how numbers can be manipulated, so people have to keep that in mind. But it's a book of numbers that can help you gauge where you are. It's like the gas tank in your car and the gas gauge. If you don't know what that means on the car, it's not going to matter to you whatsoever. I'm trying to teach people when it comes to pornography, you can use this book as a gauge to determine whether you are full of problems or you are completely empty of problems. Just like your automobile is full of gasoline and fuel, or it's completely empty of gasoline and fuel. It's not an opinion how much fuel is in your car. It's a fact. It's a mathematical measurement. And I wanted to put mathematical measurements in this book because I know that there were a lot of people who don't like advice, don't like therapists, don't want someone to step in and tell them how they should live their life. So if I just give you data, if I just give you the numbers, you can make the decision for yourself if you're using it in a healthy way or if you're not using it in a healthy way. If your behavior changed during the pandemic, did it change into an unhealthy thing, or was it just like everybody else? So all I'm trying to do is give people facts, and I'm trying to help other people who help people, if that makes sense. I think this is a book that you could give people coming into a rehab center and say, here's an easy book to read your first week here. It just talks about what's been happening with pornography lately. A doctor can be like, here, you told me about your pornography use. Just read this book and see if it means anything to you. And I think that there are people who this book can get a message to, but it's so individual. That's why I didn't want to make it. I didn't want to make a message there. It's up to you to decide if you're an addict. It's up to you to decide if you use something in a harmful way. It's up to you to decide what you need to do moving forward. Maybe the answer is you looked at pornography in a healthy way before the pandemic. Maybe you look at pornography in a healthy way during the pandemic. Maybe there's nothing wrong with what's going on with you, and you needed some kind of data to tell you. Well, here it is. So I think it's a book that can be used by just about anybody who deals with other people in the world of pornography addiction.
So is there anything? I have actually completed everything which I want to discuss with you. Like, do you wanna add something on the top of this?
Well, all I want to say is that, no matter what your behavior is during the pandemic or before the pandemic, it can always change. And it's important to understand if your behavior is healthy or not. Most of us understand what it means to, drink alcohol in a recreational, safe way. And we understand what it means to be an alcoholic who can't do that. What we need to understand as a society is, what does it mean to look at pornography in a recreational, healthy way? And what does it mean to be one of those people who is sick or who has the brain disease of addiction? And I think that needs to be, with no judgment whatsoever, that needs to be something the average person knows. The average person knows how to see a drunk, to see an alcoholic. We need the average person to be able to know how to see and recognize porn addiction, maybe not in somebody else, but at least in themselves. And hopefully this book will be a step forward towards that.
So one thing, how many copies has been sold out so far?
It's been out for just under a year, and the last time that I got a report from my publisher was in May, and I believe it has sold something like 600 or 700 copies at this point.
So are you happy with that?
I'd always like more. My second book has my first book has sold a little over 1,000 copies, and I'm cool with that. This book, like I said, has sold between 600 and 700 copies. By the time it's as old as my first book, it'll probably be back up there. Obviously, I'm not getting rich off any of that. When you factor all the time it took to write those books, and the fact that I only get between $1 and $2 per book sold, I'm not even making minimum wage. I'm making horrible money writing these books, but that's not the reason I write them. Now, my second book that was designed for partners has sold thousands and thousands of copies, and I've made some money off that book, and that's nice. And that book has exposed me to a lot more people than either of the other books. I wish they would all sell very well, but I didn't write this book to get rich. I wrote this book to just use my skills of journalism to share a story that I saw happening in front of me that I knew nobody else was going to do, because all the scientists are busy trying to solve this problem. The writers of the world are writing other stories about the pandemic. I knew that it would be good for me to document, both as somebody who's an expert in pornography addiction and somebody who used to be a journalist. It was important to me to create some kind of document that says, hey, here's where we are right now. And maybe this book will be, maybe this book will be a revelation in 20 years to people. And there's some piece of information in there that will be hugely important in 20 years. I don't know. But I didn't write it for the money. I wrote it to try to get the people who read it to think about their use. And you know what? Now there's, 600 or 700 more people thinking about it. And hey, that's good. That's maybe some of those people won't go down the road that I did. Maybe some of those people won't become addicts. Maybe some of those people will feel freer to talk to people about pornography. I've got, I wouldn't be doing this show with you right now if it wasn't for that book. So it's not just about the money. It's about how much I can get out there now. However many people listen to this show, they would not have heard this message had I not written this book. And that's one of those things that, it just extrapolates. Maybe somebody who's listening right now, maybe they'll become a client of mine in coaching when I coach porn addicts. Well, then, gee, I guess writing that book, which got me on your show, which got me this client, is a good thing. So it's hard to measure exactly. When it comes to money, no, I'm not making much money on this book at all, but I'm helping people. And maybe it will lead to other things, and maybe it will lead to helping more people. And to me, that's a win.
Yeah. So yeah, we have done almost everything. Thank you for joining me for today's podcast. So
Always love
hopefully we
being here
could
with you.
actually do a podcast on your the book, the one of the best-selling book of you, like the
Yeah.
which is for the couples. How does it for the couples?
Yeah.
And for example, most of the couples are actually seeing. I mean, they are also getting into the online sexual violation
Yep.
or behavior, or some porn is like so much is like violation of the many people's actually it's actually spoil their what innocence towards the sexuality, like the wild thoughts,
Well,
as you have already spoken in the first podcast, like the nowadays the women don't want to have sex love to make love with the virgin boys. They want somebody who is already lost
right.
virginity, because they all become violent towards the
Yeah.
sexuality, things like that. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
And it's,
absolutely, this book will be like the book for the couples should be I think it's something is there. If
yeah.
you feel we can actually do something on
Yeah,
that.
I would love to talk about that one very much. And the one statistic I'll give you about couples that's very, very interesting is that here in America, couples who start their relationship or start their marriage not looking at pornography, but then add pornography viewing to spice things up or to add some excitement, after they get married, they end up divorced 3 times more than people who were already looking at pornography at the beginning of their marriage, or people who never looked at pornography during their marriage, which to me is, it's fascinating. I don't know why that is. I don't know. I don't think it's a direct correlation, but the fact that people who add pornography viewing to their marriage divorce 3 times more than people who don't, or people who were already looking, that's pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, I so basically I have people who are actually talking these things like astrology things in India, and people who are actually comes from West also. If you look at on my podcast series, actually I'm having podcast with the Indian peoples also, and the podcast with the Western peoples also. So the one important thing
Yeah.
is like most of the people from the West actually got divorced 1 or 2 times in their life. They are trying to seek a relief or something why it is happening. Will they get into a relationship soon, or the relationship which they are having right now is gonna stay with them for some time, or what is it? So but that is one thing. And when we are speaking into Indian people, what they say is that, is there anything to reduce the uh, house problem, like the assault, sexual assault or violations which is happening
Right.
inside the home? How can we come out from that? This is what they are asked. There is no solution for, they are not actually um, in a they are not actually in entertaining an um, idea of getting divorced again and again, and they're just going on things like that. So I can see those things. Yeah, however, and also the porn which is coming from the West is actually largely consumed. If you look at on the data, the countries like India and all, the largest consumers of the pornography, online internet pornography. And how does the behavioral changes are going to happen? Because the most of the people on online is not from India or whatever, because maybe of the now it's actually changing, like people are getting into technology and stuff like that. And I have no idea
Right.
how it's gonna actually but this is the fact, because people comes to me, clients comes to me, they speak about all these things. So I can understand what is that actually, but I don't have any conclusion why it is like, because I don't know how to conclude this thing, because internet made us
Well,
a global thing, like everything is everywhere.
well, I was going to say we love to as human people, we love to wrap things up like a TV show. We love to have neat conclusions. We love to package things up and say, "Here's the problem. Here's the answer." But that's not the way life works. And it's just one giant ongoing story that was happening long before you and I were here, and it will happen long after you and I are gone. It's one long story.
Yeah, it's evolution probably. I don't know.
Yeah,
So let's
yeah,
have
absolutely.
a talk on your porn addiction for the couples somewhere. Like, what was
Yeah,
the title
I'd
of the
love
book?
to. The title of the book is He's a Porn Addict. Now What?
So that is for the couples.
That is for the couples and the partners.
Okay. Okay. Now you are gonna send me a copy of that.
Yes, I will. I will. I promise I will.
Okay then. So yeah, let's catch up sometime at that time.
All
Yeah.
right. It was great talking to you, Aaron.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. You could connect with me in arunsyoga.in, where you could see my contact details, including my phone number, my WhatsApp, and email ID. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes.